Margaret had waited 73 years to feel like a grandmother. When her millionaire son David finally brought home his bride, she wept tears of joy. The mansion had echoed with loneliness for too long, since her husband's passing. Now, with Elena's arrival, the grand halls filled with laughter again. The young woman was everything Margaret had hoped for: graceful, well-mannered, and seemingly devoted to family. Those first magical weeks painted a picture of domestic bliss. Elena would kiss Margaret's cheek each morning, brewing her favorite chamomile tea and asking about her health. She called her mama with such warmth that Margaret's heart swelled with gratitude. During dinner conversations, Elena hung on every word of Margaret's stories about David's childhood, laughing at all the right moments and making Margaret feel valued, cherished even. The elderly woman proudly told her bridge club friends about her wonderful daughter-in-law. She described how Elena helped her navigate the confusing television remote, how she remembered Margaret's medication schedule, and how she always saved the best portions of dessert for her. Margaret had begun planning holiday celebrations, imagining generations of family gathered around their table. But paradise has a way of revealing its thorns. The transformation began so gradually that Margaret initially dismissed the signs. Elena's morning kisses became perfunctory pecks. The chamomile tea appeared less frequently, often lukewarm when it did arrive. Dinner conversations shifted, with Elena's attention drifting to her phone while Margaret spoke. The woman who had once listened so intently now seemed burdened by every word. Margaret convinced herself these were natural adjustments. Marriage required time to settle, she reasoned. Perhaps Elena was simply overwhelmed by the grandeur of their lifestyle or struggling with the pressure of managing such a large household. The older woman made excuses, choosing hope over harsh reality. She had no idea that Elena's mask was already beginning to slip, revealing a cruelty that would soon shatter her world completely. The change happened like winter creeping into autumn, slowly, then all at once. Margaret first noticed it in the meals, where she once received generous portions served on fine china. Now small, measly helpings appeared on chipped plates. Elena would glide past, offering elaborate explanations about portion control and healthy eating for seniors. Margaret's stomach rumbled constantly, but she remained silent, not wanting to seem ungrateful or demanding. Elena's tone grew sharper with each passing day. When Margaret asked for a second cup of coffee, Elena would sigh dramatically and mutter about the elderly being high maintenance. The sweet endearments disappeared entirely. Mama became Margaret, then simply you. The temperature in every room seemed to drop whenever Elena entered, her presence now bringing anxiety instead of comfort. The household staff began avoiding Margaret's floor of the mansion. She caught whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she appeared. Even Rosa, the loyal housekeeper who had worked for the family for 20 years, seemed nervous around Elena now. Margaret realized she was becoming isolated in her own home, treated like an unwelcome guest rather than the woman who had built this life alongside her late husband. David remained blissfully unaware, consumed by expanding his business empire. His trips grew longer and more frequent, leaving Margaret alone with Elena's increasingly volatile moods. During his brief visits home, Elena transformed back into the perfect wife, showering him with affection while maintaining a polite distance from Margaret. The performance was flawless, leaving Margaret questioning her own perceptions. One evening, when Margaret mentioned feeling dizzy from hunger, Elena's facade cracked completely. "Maybe you should eat less and complain less," she snapped, her eyes flashing with undisguised contempt. "This isn't a nursing home. Pull your weight or stop expecting special treatment." Margaret stared in shock as the woman she had welcomed as a daughter revealed her true nature. The nightmare was just beginning, and Margaret realized she was completely alone in fighting it. The humiliation escalated beyond Margaret's worst nightmares. Elena began serving her meals on paper plates, while the rest of the household ate from elegant china. The food itself became an instrument of torment. Stale bread, leftover scraps, and portions so small they barely constituted a snack. When Margaret dared to reach for fresh fruit from the kitchen counter, Elena slapped her hand away like she was disciplining a misbehaving child. "Know your place," Elena hissed, her manicured nails digging into Margaret's wrist. This house belongs to me now. You're here on my mercy, and that mercy is running thin." The words cut deeper than any physical blow. Margaret had raised David in these rooms, had chosen every piece of furniture and hung every painting. Now she was being treated like a trespasser in her own home. The servants watched in silent horror as Elena's abuse intensified. She would deliberately bump into Margaret in the hallways, then accuse the elderly woman of being clumsy. She hid Margaret's medications, claiming she was helping by preventing dependency. Most cruelly, she intercepted phone calls from Margaret's friends, telling them the old woman was resting or not feeling well enough for visitors. Margaret's world shrank to the confines of her bedroom and the daily humiliations in the kitchen. Elena's cruelest weapon was her timing. She saved her worst behavior for moments when David was away, ensuring there were no witnesses to her true nature. She would scream at Margaret for imagined slights, then compose herself completely before David's return. The stress began taking its toll on Margaret's health. She lost weight, developed tremors, and found herself jumping at every sound. The breaking point approached like a storm gathering strength. Elena had planned an elaborate dinner party to showcase her role as the perfect hostess. Politicians, business partners, and socialites would fill their home, praising Elena's grace and sophistication. But behind the glamorous facade, Margaret knew that once the guests departed, the mask would fall away again. She had no idea that tomorrow would bring a reckoning that would change everything forever. The morning after Elena's triumphant dinner party, the kitchen overflowed with leftover food. Congealed sauces, hardened rice, and meat stiff with cold fat created a disgusting landscape across multiple platters. Margaret, weak from hunger and desperate for nourishment, attempted to make simple porridge from the rice jar. Her trembling hands barely reached the pantry before Elena's sharp heels announced her arrival. "Planning a feast, are we?" Elena's voice dripped with sarcasm as she surveyed the scene. Her red dress from the previous evening had been replaced by a pristine white outfit that made her look angelic. A cruel irony, given what was about to unfold. She gestured toward the spoiled leftovers with theatrical flourish. "Why waste time cooking when there's perfectly good food right here?" Margaret's stomach lurched at the sight of the rancid feast. "That food has spoiled overnight. It's not safe to eat." Her voice was barely a whisper, but Elena heard every word. The younger woman's eyes glittered with malicious delight as she scooped a generous portion of the foul-smelling curry onto a plate. Chunks of fat floated in the congealed sauce, like islands of disgust. "What's good enough for garbage is more than adequate for you," Elena declared, shoving the plate toward Margaret. The elderly woman stepped backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Please," she begged. "I just want some fresh food. I haven't eaten properly in days." But Elena's smile only widened at the desperation in Margaret's voice. "You'll eat what I give you, or you won't eat at all." Elena grabbed a handful of the cold, slimy rice, advancing on Margaret like a predator cornering its prey. "Open your mouth. Every last bite." When Margaret pressed her lips together in defiance, Elena's rage exploded. She forced the elderly woman to the floor, holding the spoiled food inches from her face, while Margaret sobbed and pleaded. Neither woman heard the footsteps approaching the kitchen doorway, where David stood frozen in absolute horror at the scene unfolding before him. David's world shattered in that kitchen doorway. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise him, lay crumpled on the floor with food stains across her clothes, while his wife loomed over her with cruelty blazing in her eyes. The sight burned itself into his memory forever, the contrast between Margaret's dignity even in humiliation and Elena's twisted satisfaction in causing pain. "Get away from her!" His voice thundered through the mansion as he rushed to his mother's side. Margaret collapsed into his arms, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. David held her close, feeling how much weight she had lost, noticing the fear in her eyes that spoke of weeks of torment. When he looked up at Elena, his face contained a rage she had never witnessed before. The slap echoed like a gunshot through the kitchen. Elena stumbled backward, clutching her cheek in shock. "How dare you raise your hand to me?" she shrieked, but her bravado crumbled under David's withering stare. "I should have done this the first time you showed disrespect to my mother," he replied, his voice deadly calm. "Pack your things. You have 1 hour." Elena's desperate threats about alimony and legal battles fell on deaf ears. David had built his fortune by being thorough, and he had evidence she never suspected existed. Security cameras, witness statements from servants, and documented instances of abuse painted a clear picture of Elena's true character. When they faced each other in court weeks later, her confident smirk evaporated as witness after witness testified to her cruelty. The judge's verdict was swift and absolute. No financial support shall be granted to a person who has shown such deliberate cruelty. Elena left the courthouse with nothing, no money, no reputation, no dignity. Meanwhile, Margaret returned home to find her son waiting with a warm meal prepared by his own hands. As she sat at their family table once again, she saw not the powerful businessman the world knew, but the loving boy she had raised. The wounds would heal, but the lesson would last forever. Those who show cruelty to the vulnerable will ultimately face justice, while love and respect always triumph in the end.